Okay, what thought I would go over today is do a follow-up video on my surfacing, my stain surfacing of this wardrobe. So we're going to be going on, starting up from where we left off last time. And what we're going to be doing is some different things. We're going to be going in and start putting our bump on. We didn't really do much of a bump last time. We just left it as the bump that was on it when we created it. And then we're going to be putting some details on the surface. Okay, some staining and some inlays into it. And then I'm going to show you how, with this simple changing of the original bitmap, that this can always go through and then change it to a different type of wood. And so this is the way we build these node structures. It's easy to use them over and over again and get different variations. We're also going to be going in, I'm going to show you how to be using an ambient occlusion pass to, or an ambient occlusion node to create a dirt map. And we're going to be doing that too. So we're going to be going over quite a few things in here to take that initial video and to tweak it out to be a little bit more impressive. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so this is where we left off in the last video. So what we're going to be doing in here is coming in right now. I think the first thing I'm going to do is to come in and put some dirt in here. So we're going to do a dirt node to put on top of here. Okay, when I start initially doing the dirt nodes, they're kind of subtle. So one of the things that I initially do is I'll come in here and go ahead and create me just a regular kind of a garbage node. It's a standard shader and put on this. Okay, so we'll put the standard shader in here just so it's easy and quickly can render this and can get our dirt node the way we want it. Okay, so I'm going to go in here to my diffuse, and the way I like to do this is to start off with some bright colors. So I'm going to put a mix node in here. Now the reason I do this is because when we're using an ambient occlusion, which is what we're going to do, an ambient occlusion node to get our dirt mask in there, is that it's real subtle, and so if you have it black and white, it's hard to tell what's just shadows. And so what I normally do is come in here and put some bright colors in here. Okay, so I'll put something like some pink in this top one, and maybe a bright blue in the bottom one, and then it's easier to see what's going on when we're adjusting these nodes. Now initially they'll kind of jump out at us, and then we'll have to adjust it, but this will get us pretty close really quick. Okay, so what you'll see, and we'll just do some region renders in here, is this is just going to give us a solid color right now. Okay, so just a solid color, and what it's doing is showing us the top color. Now what we're going to do is in this mix amount, we're going to put an ambient occlusion node in there. So go mental ray ambient occlusion node. Okay, the ambient occlusion is a special node that puts shading into areas where two objects are going together, which is called an occlusion. Okay, so by default, what this is going to want to do is to put color in those areas. Okay, now by default, this max distance is set to 0, and initially you kind of think of, or I always did, I always thought of this, well, okay, it means that it's not calculating any distance out, but really 0 means infinity. And this is where a lot of people run into problems when they're using their ambient occlusions. They leave it at 0, which means it's putting shading over their entire piece, where really that's not what you want. What you want is just to be able to control that. So we're just going to start in here, and let's just go out so maybe 6 inches and see what that gets us. So we're going to calculate that, and let's see what that gets us. Okay, so now you're going to see that we're going to start getting a little bit of that pink showing up in the occlusion areas around in here. See them popping in there. So it's a really cool node because I don't have to go in here and do any painting, but I can clump dust and dirt around where the occlusions, which is where they would normally build up. So I would be able to do that and not have to spend a lot of times painting bitmaps and such. Okay. All right. Now, a couple of things on your controls. You have samples here. That's the quality. Okay. So how grainy it is. And normally we kick that up pretty high. But that's one of the beauties of using this as a dirt. We kind of want it gritty. So I'm going to turn this down to say maybe 8, which means it'll render faster and it'll be a little bit grittier for that area. Now the max distance is how far out from the occlusion is it going to try to calculate to place the occlusion, how far out. The spread is the gradation of the edge of it. Okay, so I can kind of increase this a little bit by giving it more spread. Let's go for, say, maybe 1.5 on this one. And let's just tighten this up so we don't have to wait quite as long. And let's render that. So like I said, when I initially do this, I use some bright colors, so it's pretty easy to see it doing its thing. And that's starting to look pretty good. See how we're drifting out now? So this will be like some dirt and dust that's been accumulating in these corners over time. Now, one of the things that students ask me all the time is how to get more of it on there, okay? And that's kind of tricky because what it's doing is that's based on this darkness right here, and this is already set to black, so there's really no direct way to get that. But there's an indirect way to get it. So what we do is we come in here for our mix amount, and we go ahead and put a composite node in here, okay? Composite node, we went over that before. That's just like layers in Photoshop. And so we put this in here, and now it's going straight through, so it's really doing nothing now. But if we add ourselves another node, and we put the same occlusion right back into it, and we put this on multiply, then it's going to take the darkness and multiply it on top of itself. It doesn't take us any longer in rendering time because we're only having to calculate the ambient occlusion once, but it'll get us a more pronounced dirt in there, okay? So that's kind of a little trick that you can do to kick it out a little bit more in there, okay? Now, another thing that we want to do sometimes is in that area, we want it to not just be this gradation, but we want it to clump a little bit in there. So I'm going to show you how to make it clump. But so far, we're getting a nice dirt in here, and I can back off of it. I crank it up pretty high at first, and then I can back it off. Because in the end, we don't want it to jump out as we want it to be subtle. But that's giving us a pretty nice look right there. Okay, so we're just going to unplug that for a second, and what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to add some noise into this. Okay, so we're going to add some noise, and let's just double click on our noise and see what our settings are. Let's go with fractal, and this has got a setting of 2 right now. Let's see how small that is. Still pretty big. We're going to bring that down. So let's go down. Let's say maybe, let's try 0.2 because you can barely see it on there. Now we'll start seeing the pattern showing up. But we really want this pattern down pretty small. So let's try 0.02 and see what that gets us. Yeah, now that's better. A ratio of about the size of the clumps that I want in there. Okay. Excuse me. Now, what we're going to want to do is to clamp this. Okay, so we don't want it so peppery. We want more distinguished look. So we're going to do clamping. Now, a noise has an output node built into it. Sometimes, like we use smoke, we have to put an output node in it, but noise has one built into it. So we're just going to do our typical clamping. I usually start this always just right in the center. So these two nodes, these two points will be right on top of each other. And then we'll do a quick render and see what we get. Okay. And then sometimes you'll have to adjust this, pulling it left and right. Actually, that's given me a pretty good look. Okay. I'm probably going to want more black in it later, but that's given us a pretty good look right there. Okay. So that's what we want. Okay. So now here's what we're going to do. We're going to put our node structure back together, but now I'm going to lay on top of this on our composite another layer, and I'm going to put the noise on that layer as a multiply back on top. And then I'm going to drive this with this ambient occlusion. So when I put this in the first color slot, then what it's going to do is to throw that in those specific areas. Now for right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn off our first two, so all we'll see is that little grunge we're putting in there, and let's see what we got. Now, when you first get it, we may not see much in here because of our spread on it, so we're going to need to crank this up. So we're going to go to our clamp, and we're going to tell it to add more black into it, and so we're going to pull that across. Let's see if we can't force it to start getting us some in there. Okay, we can just see a little bit starting to creep in there. Okay, so we're going to pull it more. See what that gets us. Okay, so now we're having more of some clumping that's going on in those areas. So instead of just the gradation, but some clumping that's going in there too. And that's looking pretty good. I think I might go up with my size just a little bit. So let's go up a little bit in size. And let's go ahead and turn our other two back on so we can see them all kind of ganging up together. And like I said, I try to always push it more than what I want. That way, when I actually switch over to my actual shaders, I can pull it back a little bit. And then we can do the same thing with our clump. If we want our clump a little bit more on there, which I think I do, we'll do the same thing. We'll add another layer on here. We'll funnel it back into that layer on a multiply node, and that will double the amount of it that's going to be in there. Now, on these, we have a percentage, an opacity percentage in here. So this is where I can come in later. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to crank it up as high as I can get it, the most that I think I would ever need it. And then when I put my real shader here, then I can start, backing these back down from 100% to say, 60% or something to back it back off. But that's giving me a pretty good look in there right now. I'm getting some nice clumping in there, and I think that looks pretty good. Now we're going to do another thing in here, which one of the things that's a little bit stark right now is you'll see that this only goes in occlusion, but nothing is on this top surface, okay? And that's a little bit odd, so I'm going to show you how to fix that. So what we're going to do is to take this ambient occlusion node, and I'm just holding down my shift key, and I'm going to copy it. Now what we're going to do is when I double click on that to bring up its attributes, I can do an inverted occlusion, which means it's going to put stuff on the top, okay? So we're going to add another layer on there, and we're going to put that on there. Now we're going to turn all these others so we just see the top one right now. And what it's going to do is put some dirt on the top part of it, okay? Now, I think it's going to be a little bit too much, and so we're going to clamp that one back down. But this will keep us from it looking really odd that we only have stuff on the inside and nothing on the top. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back just a little bit. Let's say maybe 1 here, and maybe, let's go maybe 3 inches here. See what that gets us. Okay, that's better, because I just want a little bit on the top. Most of it would be grouped inside of it, just a little bit on the top. So that looks pretty good. Let's turn these others on and see what we get. Oops. Sorry, I left that on normal. That will need to be on multiply. Otherwise, it's overriding the other ones. I think I wanted a bit more in there. All right, let's try that. So you kind of just have to work on this stuff. It's subtle changes that you're making in here to get it the way you want it. And so it takes a little bit of trial and error to get it. But that's looking pretty good. A little bit of dust on this top surface. lot accumulating into the crevices. We got some clumping in the crevices, and so this will look pretty good. Okay, and so I'm just going to do a whole render of this so you can see what the whole thing looks like, and so I'm going to pause while I do that render. Okay, so there it is with the final render, and so this is going to be our dirt mask that we're going to be used to put on here. Okay, so let's just go ahead and copy this, and we can go ahead and just document it. We'll put it over here in Photoshop with our where we were at. So we'll just go ahead and drop that in there. Okay, so now that we've got this done, all we really need is this node now. This is our dirt node. So we're going to go back, and let's just put our shader back on it. Okay, so this will be able to control any of the dirt that we want to control to put on our piece. Okay, so we're just going to go in here to our color correction node, and that's plugging into our diffuse, and we're going to put a mix in here, okay, which allows us to mix two things together. And so then and there are other ways you could do this, but this is what I think is the easiest way right now since I already have this chain. So when I go right through there, then that's going to apply that on there. Now, what I can do is in my second node, that can be where the color is. As a matter of fact, we actually want to do this backwards. We want the pink was being the slot. So we're going to want this in the second slot because the second slot is the blue. So if you look at that, again, we'll look at that so you get that. On the mix, the blue, which is where we want our wood, is the bottom. So that's where we're putting our wood through this mix is in the bottom. Then whatever color we dial in the top, okay, that's going to be our dirt. So we'll go with something about like that. And then this will give us our blend of the dirt in there. And so let's dump this. Let's get a region render going. And then that's going to drop our dirt on top of it, okay? And then we can adjust how much we want it on there, okay? Let's just see what our initial render gets us here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Go ahead and render. That's a little green. We don't want it, our dust to be green, but I initially do that to make it so it's easy to see it. And then we'll back off of it. Okay, so now we can come in here and a little less saturation. Probably a little lighter. A little lighter will be good. And then let's just kind of clamp this and just look at a small portion of this render so we can kind of speed up the process. Okay, let's go there. That's a little more neutral. I like that better. Okay, and then I'm going to start doing some adjusting in these and backing these off till I get it just the way I want. And I'm going to pause it while I do my final adjustments so that you can just see the final thing once I get it adjusted the way I want it. So I'm going to pause it. All I'm going to be doing while I'm pausing is just adjusting the amounts of these on here so that I can kind of control what the final look is. And that's going to take me, a few minutes to do. So I'm going to pause this while I'm doing it, and then I'll come back once I get it the way I want. Okay, so there it is with the final dirt adjusted in there. I adjusted the percentages of things as well as I adjusted the color. And that looks pretty good there. Let's go ahead and copy that and take it over here in Photoshop and go ahead and paste that in. And so you can see that's what it's getting us. And there is the before and after on our piece. Okay. Some dirt ganging up on there. And I may still do some more adjustments, but we have a lot more to do before we're ready to do the final adjustments on it. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to come in and start giving this wardrobe some kind of a finish, because right now we've just been using it as just a matte without any kind of gloss in it, and I want it to, it's been enameled at some points and got some lacquers on it. So we're going to come in here and turn our reflectivity on. You can see what that's doing. Okay. Now we have a glossiness slider here for the amount of how glossy we want it to be. Okay, so if you pull it to the left, just a little bit of a sheen. If I go real far to the right, it's really glossy. Okay, so we'll have to kind of just find a spot in here. And then this is reflection, reflecting what's out around it. Okay, now I don't have an HDRI image in the background, and in the end I would. But I don't know exactly where we're going to be putting it yet, so we would do that final adjustments on that once we got it in the scene, okay? And that'll affect the reflection. All right, so let's start adjusting this and seeing what we're going to be getting in here once we start getting our sheen put in. As a matter of fact, let's render it, say, right through here, because there's a light right over here, and we'll be able to see how much punch we're getting with our reflection when we do that with our glossiness. So you can see it, there's a light over here, and that'll help us kind of see what's happening here. It's a little too much. Back it off. I want this to seem like it's been there a while. Okay, so it's not new, so we don't want to get it too glossy. So now we're getting some nice sheen in there. That looks pretty good. And now, since we're getting that glossiness, that sheen in there, we need to start kicking up our bump, and we need to start working on that. So let's do that next. Okay, so right now we just have the actual wood image that we initially came with in the bump, but I'm going to want to put in some bump from one of our stain maps. I'm going to use this one. Okay. So what we're going to do is to come in here and in our bump slot, we're going to put a composite node in there too, so we can layer these in. So we'll go ahead and put this on layer 1. And then we're going to put this stain in layer 2, so both of those will gang up on our bump. Okay, now I'm going to turn our bump up. So we need to go down here on our bump. Let's go from 30. Let's kind of go ahead and kick it up to 90. And let's kind of see where that's getting our bump before we start putting our stain bump on top of there. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. Now, one of the things I do a lot of times when my bump is I will come into my shader and we want to turn the diffuse off. Okay, so this is how much of the diffuse is in it. So I'm just going to slide this to the left. So it'll only be a gray shader in here, which makes it easier for me to see my bump when I'm first doing it, so that I don't have all of that other shading going on. So I'm only looking at bump. And I'm just looking at the subtle bump of the wood grain. That looks pretty good right there. So that works. Okay, so let's go ahead and lay this other one on top. We'll do that as a multiply on there. And we'll need to turn that down because it's going to really jump out at us. Okay, so now you'll start seeing some subtleness of that bump on top of there. Starting to break that up. It's looking pretty good. Let's turn it up a little bit more. 40. So that's going to give us some grain wherever this stain was in here. That's looking pretty good. I think one of the things people do is they go too much on their bumps. They scream bump at me. We talked about that before. Don't scream things at me. It should be very subtle. Okay, let's turn our shader back up. Do a render. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm going to let that render, and I'm going to pause it while that's rendering, and then we'll go to the next thing. Okay, so here it is after it's rendered. So let's go ahead and copy that, take it into Photoshop, and let's paste that on top. And so you can see quite a bit of difference going on now. Here it's flat. Okay, so now we've put some glossiness to it. We've started putting a bump on it, so it's starting to have a dimensional layer to it. And so it's coming together more and more. Okay, so now I think what we want to do is to go ahead and put, let's put an inlay in here. Let's put a little bit of detailing, like there's some carved inlay onto the surface. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to need to do is to put a mapping coordinate on here for that. So let's just go to our front view. And we've already got some mapping coordinates on here. Okay, so we have our stain mapping coordinates. And I've already put one on here for the inlay. Okay, but let me just show you how I did that. Okay, so what I did is I came in here and put a new UVW map on it. And then once you put it on there, we're doing planar. You need to go click it on here to your alignment tools and click on View Align so it faces us. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is go to the top view. Let's go to a wireframe, and I'm going to move it towards us so it's kind of moving where we can see it better from the front. So we go to Gizmo, move it towards us, go back to the front, and it's easy to kind of see it. Now, this is going to be going over the doors. I'm going to do one bitmap that I'm going to project onto the doors. So what I'm going to do is go down here where it says region fit, and that'll allow me to actually draw the rectangular coordinate. And so I'm just going to click, and I'm going to draw that like so. Okay. And so now you'll see that coordinate is just going over the doors. Okay. Now, same thing, I would come in here, right click, rename this, and I would call this inlay, and then we're going to put this on channel 4. So that any bitmap I would use this projection. I put it on channel 4, it'll do a planar map from the front. Now, I've already done this, and you'll see it right down here, inlay 4. That lets me know, okay, that's inlay bitmap, and it's on channel 4, and then that's going to project on there. Now, it doesn't matter what order these are in. I know that confuses people sometimes. I mean, you can kind of think of these layers, but not really. It doesn't really matter to a certain degree. Now, it does in the sense that if this was a 1 and this was a 1, this one would be overriding that one. But since these are on different channels, it's almost like these are all transparent, and so it doesn't matter what order they're in. Okay? So what I would do now is just do a print screen on this. So I do a print screen. I would take it into Photoshop. Alt print screen, so I don't need my whole double. There we go. Okay, so let's just zoom into that, and then we would crop to that. Okay, so we would come in and crop right to that. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but you want it pretty close. Now the resolution on that would be really bad, so I would go up here and go to image size, and I would go at least 200%, if not 300%. And of course, I tell people all the time never to enlarge things in Photoshop, but in this case, this is okay because this is just a template, so we won't be using any of this, and then we're going to create our bitmap on top of that, okay, for our stain. Now, I've already created a bitmap, so this is the one that I've created. So I just went online, found some patterns, and then I laid them on top till I got them the way that I wanted them, okay, and then what I want really is the invert of this. So I'm going to go to image, adjust, invert. I want black on white, okay, because black is transparent and white is opaque. So when I put this on here, the black will all disappear and we'll only see the pattern where the white is. Now you want to make sure you do like an auto contrast on this because we need to make sure this is completely white and that's completely black. And a lot of times it seems like it's black, but it's really like a 96% gray, and then it won't become completely transparent, okay? So then I save this out as a target file, and I'll be able to use it as our piece, okay, to do our stain with, okay? So now we'll come in here and go ahead and switch back to our camera. And let's get our safe frame back on. Okay, so in our material, what we're going to do now is I want to initially create that as a stain that's on the surface of that. So we're going to go back over to our composite, and let's just clean this up. Okay. So we're going to go back onto our composite, which is our color that's on there, this composite here, and we're going to add another one on top, another layer, okay? And in that layer, we're going to load that bitmap, okay? So I'm just going to clone that one, plug it in there, double click, and here is my mask. So I'll load that in. Now, the main thing is to make sure that we had this on channel 4. So it's going to read channel 4. Now, you'll notice I put it in the layer, and the reality is I don't really want it in the layer. I want it in the layer mask because it's going to be a mask. And then in the layer itself, I'm going to put a color correction node. And then that will allow me to lay color into that area. So I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to kind of get something that's kind of a brownish burgundy color. That's kind of the color of our wood that we're using. And so this is going to mask that on there. And so we'll do a region render here and see what we ended up with. And let's go right through here for the pattern. And you'll see that's going to put me that pattern onto the surface, okay, because I'm telling it to read number 4, and that's what we're doing. Now, right now, it's just overlaying it on top, and then we're going to tell it to mask it out, and then we're going to adjust the color. Okay, so let's cancel that, and we'll go adjust it back on top. Okay, so our wood had come off there because I'd accidentally, when we were moving these layers around, I accidentally turned off these mapping coordinates over here. And so that was getting rid of the wood that was in there because it didn't have coordinates to lay that wood in there. Okay, so we've got this inlay going in here, and it's going to be way, way, way too dark because what I really want is just a slight, subtle change to it. I don't want it too dominant, okay? But right now, It's pretty dominant in there, but that's okay when we first start out, and then we'll back it down. It's what I have a tendency to do, is always kind of really push the envelope with everything and then back them down to get them to the final stage that I want. All right, so I'm going to come in here, and I think I'm going to turn this on to a multiply, so it's more of a stain on there than a solid color. And then we can start coming in here and turning it down so it's not as dominant on the surface. So let's see where we're going with that. Okay, so we're getting that nice stain in there. I still think it's a little dark, but the next thing I want to do is go ahead and push the envelope and put it in the bump slot so that it's going to seem like it's carved in there. So what we're going to do is the same thing that we're doing before with our bump, is we're just going to come in here and put another layer on there, and then we're going to plug this on top of there, okay, which is going to lay it on top. And then we'll go ahead and do a multiply on top of that, and let's see what we get. Okay, I'm going to pause. Okay, now what's happening here is, because the nature of the way we're putting this together, it's causing this to look like it's raised off the surface, and I want it carved in. And that's because this needs to be reversed out. Now, it needs to be this way for this node up here, but we want to reverse it out. So what we can do is to come in here and put a node in here, and there's a couple nodes. You can put a color correction node, you can put an output node. Both of those have the ability to do an invert for those. Okay, so we're going to do one of those. Okay, so I'm just going to do an output node in here. So we're going to go put an output node. Like I said, there's a couple different nodes you could do in here. You could do a color correction node. You could do an output node, because all I'm really going to do is to tell it to invert this. And both those nodes have an inversion on them. So if I just go invert right here, then it's going to reverse that out. And so now this is going to be an innie instead of an outie. And so I'm going to render that. I'm going to pause it while it's rendering that. Okay, so there it is with the inlay going in. And that's looking pretty good. I think the next thing I want to do, it's still a little bit too dark and it's mixed there. So I'm going to turn that down quite a bit. I want it pretty subtle in there. And then I think I'm going to kick up the bump a little bit to make the bump a little bit more dominant. So we'll go to our bump. I've got it at 90. Let's try 100. And then I'm going to render that. And let's see our final mix. Okay, so I'm going to pause it while it renders. So here's our final render with our inlay in there. So subtle staining on it. Nice bump in there. Let's go ahead and copy that. Paste that on. So we've added that to it. Okay, so there's our render from the first lecture I did. Here's once we're getting our sheen on there and starting to get our bump in there, getting our dirt in there, and then our inlay to punch this up a little bit. It's looking very nice. Now, I do want you to notice something when I'm doing this, though. Look right up here at the top of this, that when I turn this on and off, can you see that our pattern is going up there? Okay. So one of the things that you have to remember to do is when we load a bitmap in Max, it assumes that we want to tile the bitmap. So if I come in here and go to my bitmap that I'm floating on here, you'll see that it tiles in here. So it automatically is tiling itself. So you want to be sure, since we're only want this in one place, that we turn that tiling off, and then we won't have a situation where it's tiling up there, okay? So be wary of that when you're using some kind of a bitmap that you're wanting to, that the coordinate, the way you're doing the coordinate, that it could have a tendency to double itself and put back on there. Things like labels, we will put labels on, stickers. We want to be sure that we turn that tiling off, otherwise it'll just tile the sticker all the way across there. And you have to be sure that if you have a separate bump, that you turn that off too. Now, in this case, this is the bump, so I just had to turn it off in the one place. But a lot of times, you'll have the actual bitmap you're putting on there, and then you'll have the bump as well. And so you'll want to make sure that you turn those off. Okay, so at this point, this piece is pretty much finished. But then the last thing I want to do is to show you how easy it is to take this node structure. So we already have this material node structure, and how to take this and turn it into something else really quick, okay? So all we'd have to do is, if we wanted this to be a different material, is to come in and replace this first wood node that we have right there, okay? Now, so let's go down to our woods and let's get something. Oh, let's get this walnut right here. And then I only need the walnut node, the bitmap. Okay, so I don't need the rest of this. And then if we came in and plugged that in, then it's going to update all the way through my chain. Okay, and it's going to turn it into a walnut. And let's just do a region on that, say maybe right through here. And so real quickly, I can turn it from one kind of wood to another kind of wood, okay, just by replacing that, okay. So we'll get a nice kind of a more darker, kind of a deeper wood instead of the more reddish kind of wood. Now, a couple other things to help this out. Okay, so you can see that the pattern will be the same on here. Okay, because all our patterns are the same, but it's easy to alter those too. So let's go into our front view here. And if I go to, say, this stain, this is the first stain. Okay, so if I go to that gizmo and I slide this across, that's moving the pattern that's on the front. In fact, we can go ahead and turn these on where we can see this. So let's turn that stain on so we can see it. So I'm moving that stain over, okay, and I can also slide it forward, and I'm moving it that way too. So now it's got the same stain on there, so I'm not getting charged for more render time for another bitmap, but I'm just realigning it, okay? So let's turn this one on so we can see it, and that's controlled by this one. So I can do the same thing, slide that over and slide it forward. And now those stains will have changed, okay? The other thing that we can do also is on our smoke, okay? We can change that pattern too. If you go to the smoke right here, it's got a phase right here. Look this closer. And if I just change this phase, then it changes the alignment of that fractal, and so it will move too. So those distortions that we put in there between the two colors will change, okay? Now, the last thing that we want to make sure we do is you'll notice sometimes when you do this, because the wood's a little bit darker, that maybe our spots are showing up a little bit more. And so we want to adjust it a little bit. I think this one's too light now. It's going to show up a little bit too much. So I may want to maybe something about like that, so it's not quite as dominant. Ooh, we're going to crash. Okay, I guess we'll pause and come back. Okay, so there it is rendered out. Okay, with the different kind of wood on it. And let's go over here to Photoshop. Now, I want to just show you what we're doing here. So here is where I just changed the wood over. And you can see the pattern. The pattern's the same as it was before, but this is where I'm doing the shift. See how the wood is shifting over now because I've moved that pattern over. Okay. And then I've changed the pattern of the fractal. And because of the nature of that wood, this is a little too dominant. And so then I subdued it. So, and then let's go ahead and paste in our final render here. And there's the final render of with the inlay and everything in there. So we're going from our okay, so it's really easy to be able to take it and be able to get a nice another look just really quick using the same node structure. So that's where I'm getting in that you can archive those nodes and use those. Okay, so in your material editor, you can create a material library. Okay, and just so everybody knows, maybe some of you don't know how to create a material library. So right here where your materials, there's a little button right here, and you can say new material library, and then you can give this any kind of a name that you want. Okay, just give it a name. It'll put it in your material libraries folder, which is funny because I see people all the time putting their bitmaps in the material libraries folder. They think, okay, that's where my materials go. No, bitmaps are images. They go in the images folder. This is where your material library goes. And so now you'll see it has a material library. Now to put this in, all I have to do is drag this and drop it in there. And there it is. It's in there. Now, you see how this has a little bit of an asterisk on here? That means, yes, we've put this in a material library, but we've not saved the material library since we updated it. So right here where it says LIB, you need to right click on that and then save, and then that'll update that. Okay. Good thing about Max now is if you were actually to save your project and were shutting it down, it would tell you that you had not saved your material library and ask you if you wanted to save it, and you'd say yes, and it'd update it for you. Okay. Okay. All right. So that pretty much wraps it up on this piece. So what we've covered today is a lot of advanced stuff, you know, coming in using an AO shader to come in and get dirt on our surfaces. How to start getting some inlays and how to do staining and adjusting the bump map. So we had quite a few things that we went over where we took the original piece, which looked nice as it was, but we just taken it to another level. And so this process of staining and overlaying and using different kinds of projection maps, you know, we used a planar projection, we used different kinds of box mapping. So I never was able to actually have to unwrap this piece, but I can get a pretty nice look. It's pretty fast. Plus we can save the node structure so we can use it. Like if you had another piece of, like a desk or something that was going to be sitting by this, you could use the same node structure, pop it right on there, change some of the patterning a little bit. Of course, obviously you change the inlay and then you'd be ready to go and you'd be have that one really fast because you've already built the structure. Okay. So hopefully this has taught you, a few things that you hadn't thought of before. Different ways to approach things. You know, when we're doing environments, we need to be very fast with it. And it's not always, let's just take everything and unwrap it and go, you know, paint them in Photoshop. You know, you look on the internet and that's what everybody says to do. Oh, this is the way you do it. This is the way you do it. This is the way you do it. Yeah. You know, that's one way to do it. But I can tell you when you're in production, that's not always the way to do it. I need a faster process than that. Okay. All right. So, see you later.